Hello and welcome to another aircraft build on My Model Corner. Well, here it is, the Tamiya release of the F-14D Tomcat. So much good has been said about their relatively recent release of the F-14A version. I'm expecting great things from this kit. The box art is really quite satisfying. I love the artistry, the colors selected, and it blends well in combination with the Tamiya banner on top. I think it's one of the best covers I've ever seen. The F-14 is without doubt one of the most iconic U.S. fighter aircraft ever built. It certainly helped with the F-14 status having a few movies featuring these fighters. There was The Final Countdown, which is a fun movie if you're a military aviation and history buff. And of course there was that other movie released in 1986 called, I forget, it was Top Chef or Top Airplane or Top Grossing Movie. An overview of all the plastic demonstrates that Tamiya has created a monster of a kit in terms of pieces within the set. Additionally, we get a 24-page instruction booklet, a mini historical guide that includes some reference pictures, and 2 decal sheets. The first contains markings for 3 different squadrons, the Black Lions, the Bounty Hunters, the Grim Reapers, and on the second sheet, the Red Rippers. This second sheet also includes other decals as noted here in the text. We also have canopy frame masking paper as well as metallic stickers. Finally, we have a nice color reference guide for painting and decals. And as always, we start with the cockpit. This kit has a number of parts here. I like the fact that the consoles are separate from the tub of the cockpits, giving room to detail the panels and switches. Let us begin. I remember seeing the F-14 for the first time as a very young boy, and I was amazed at the time of its almost space-age looks. 2 vertical tails, sweepable main wings, and 2 powerful engines. For the model, we can start by painting in the cockpit areas that are predominantly gray. After the gray of each console is complete, we can then detail by filling in the black panels and then coloring in the switches and buttons. Next, we mask off the gray console frames. Using a wooden toothpick to fill in the lines allows us to follow the contours without scratching the surfaces. I decided to use this approach to avoid possibly hand brushing in an uneven coat. We can mask off the throttle block to prepare for hand brushing in even lines. Moving along, we airbrush black onto the console panels. Rather than paint in each individual button and switch, we can remove paint on the raised outcroppings by gently using a sanding stick flat and parallel to the pieces. There are a considerable number of these protrusions, so we can cover a lot quickly using this method. We can use a pointed file to reach hard-to-reach places and broad areas the stick might miss. And using a sewing needle, we can paint in colored switches where required. Of course, we can go to the brush for larger areas, such as this khaki canvas covering. Finally, we can use our knife point to lightly scrape away paint between the panels. This gives them definition, an appearance of reflected light on the edges, and wear, which altogether eliminate the look of just one large black exterior. I like the Tamiya display decals here. They give the screens a realistic glow. Everything else is subtle in appearance, giving the cockpit more of an authenticity that we're aiming for. Of note is this interesting construction design. We have these tabs that help align the upper, mid, and aft fuselage pieces to create a natural step line on the top surface of the jet. Afterwards, we add the central portion of the top fuselage to the lower fuselage. This also fits well together. Next are the forward portions of the engine air intakes. Each of the ventral fins fit snugly in place. At this moment, we can install the nose of our F-14D. It's looking more like a Tomcat now. Tamiya Engineering once again nicely builds layers of structural integrity while also using the upper layers to hide seam lines and also create edges along natural panel lines that reduce filler and sanding work. Importantly, we add the dual twin sensor pod, which is one of the few visual exterior references that distinguish the F-14D from earlier F-14 versions. While we wait for the bulk of the fuselage to bond and cure, we can keep the ball rolling by doing other work. The wings, horizontal and vertical stabilizers, wheels, engine sections, and ejection seats are already assembled. We can address the landing gear as much as possible by installing smaller struts before paint touch-ups and overall detailing of all the mechanical features. We can also begin concentrating on the engine nozzles and burner sections. We can also add some gray paint to the actuator mechanisms. Decals are provided for the darker inner slats, but I chose to paint these in. Next, we can rub in and adjust oil paint to create exhaust residue and heat stress on the nozzle metal. Applying a thicker amount of the black oil paint, we can work in our burn marks from the hot exhaust onto the inner engine nozzles as well as the burner cans. We can take a quick progress check and make any adjustments as required. As an added touch, we can pencil in these lines that reside on every other slat internally. And now on to one of my favorite areas to work, the ejection seats. Once again, scraping away at the edges of surface detail, we can highlight the features and create that wear and reflection of light that really accents these pieces. Using our sewing needle, we can add the bands to the ejection seat handle. And putting it all together with the seat decals and some wash on the seat cushions to dirty it up, we have a completed cockpit seat. Turning our attention in no particular order, we can emphasize our gear assemblies to provide shadows and some grunge. After appreciating our missiles, we can apply some gray paint. With a fine tip brush, we can add trim to our landing gear doors. At this point, we've done most of what we can do on the side, and now we can come back to the main body of the jet. We have to decide which squadron and paint scheme we are aiming for. Initially, I was going for the black lions. I liked the colors and the design, but I discovered after looking at the pictures it was unlike any other Navy jet. It was actually kept clean and virtually immaculate, so it doesn't really fit with my preference of building used-looking aircraft. I concentrated my eyes on the Grim Reapers or the Bounty Hunters. Since I already had built an F-18 Super Hornet in a previous video that had black vertical stabilizers similar to the Grim Reaper's tail flash, I chose the Bounty Hunters. Also, there are pretty good photos that this high visibility rendering of the jet was typical Navy, dirty, faded, and used. It's something we can sink our teeth into, weathering-wise. Let's install our overspray protection by temporarily adding panels, doors, and also tape, cotton, and paper towel pieces. Then we'll be able to apply our black shading coat. Okay, back with you once again. Before we start our marbling in of the main gray coat, I want to experiment by pre-shading with some white paint to create more unevenness in the tones of the overall paint scheme distinctive of a used Navy jet. We can pick random areas as well as concentrate on panel sections. We can start with the flight control surfaces to get a feel and practice this roundabout type of application before we hit the main body of the jet. While this looks like a mess to begin with, we can remind ourselves that once we apply the main color coat, we can filter out areas we don't like as well as retain some of the pieces that create the effect we want. It's now time to apply our main color coat. Once again, I started with the flight control surfaces in order to get some practice in. To approach this layer, we want to continue to use the marbling technique. We would like to obtain a splotching effect using the combination of all three coats, the black primer layer, the white pre-shade layer, and the final gray layer. Our investment in the previous two paint treatments will pay off if we can get the right amount of balance between all three colors. Don't rush this step. Slowly and methodically add the gray. In this case, I concentrated the gray in the center of panels, tried to leave a kind of post shading at some panel edges, while also muting and blending the white and black coats. Keep reassessing the exterior look. You want to avoid that tendency to fill everything in, so evaluating constantly is important to avoid losing the foundation we've put in place. Don't forget we have additional steps that include washes and weathering later that will also build upon this core look we are formulating. It's time to add our protective gloss coat to the model before we apply the weathering and washes. I applied 2 coats about 30 minutes apart at 3 a.m., too dark for video outside. We can attend to some other details before we hit the weathering and wash. On to the important step of detailing to bring out those panel lines. I didn't want to darken the model too much, so I'm foregoing my wash using oil paint. Also, there are too many lines on this Tomcat to use my pencil shading technique, so I'm going to try a black pastel, water, and a dab of soap mixture. We simply fill in all the panel lines, screws, vents, and such. Then we let it dry for a bit, then clean up with a cotton swab with plain water. Always go at an angle to the lines to avoid lifting the wash right back out of the crevices. Now on to weathering, where we can add broad grime streaks, fluid leaks, and paint chipping where needed. One area we want to capture are these grease arcs created as the wings are extended and retracted, much like doing snow angels in the winter. First, we can attach a wing. Then retract the wing and mask the outer border. You can lighten or darken this inner area. I've seen both in pictures. I used a white pastel. We can then hold the pencil and open and close the wing to trace our arcs for mucking it up. I used a combination of a regular pencil and a charcoal pencil and smudged it up with an eraser. Here's a couple shots of weathering. Our final significant task painting is the frames of the forward windscreen and cockpit canopy glass. As mentioned before, this kit supplies masks, but they are not pre-cut. This is the first set I've encountered with such a group. It should be interesting to see how well they perform. It turns out these are more of a convenience rather than a time saver, since you still have to cut and align the pieces, notwithstanding it takes some effort. Time to fasten the decals before the completion of assembly. I'll be using the Mark Fit once again. Just apply an initial layer to break the surface tension, apply and set the emblems in place using a cotton swab, and afterwards we can strengthen the adhesion by applying another coat of the Mark Fit. I found I had to apply more layers than I'm accustomed to using this decal fluid. Now that the decals are in place, we can begin final assembly. We start with the nose landing gear. We continue on with the main gear. Next, we add the pylons and the missiles. Here's a shot installing the tarps pod. Rolling out 180 degrees, we can install the ejection seats. Then the engines. Next we go on to the vertical tails. Finally, we seal in all our work with a couple layers of dull coat. Coming up on the end here, I'll be borrowing the carrier deck display from the previous F-18 project for the final presentation. Stay tuned at the end if you'd like to vote or suggest an idea for Project 12. Take care, and we'll see you later.